The briefing room at Bagram Airfield fell silent when the grainy satellite footage began to play. 27 minutes of radio silence. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Phantom 26, had disappeared into a valley where 3 previous aircraft had been lost to concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Intelligence had classified the area as a no-fly zone after a Chinook went down there with 12 souls aboard. The Taliban controlled every ridgeline, every cave system, every approach. When Phantom 26's transponder blinked back online, limping toward friendly airspace at barely 3,000 feet, the entire Tactical Operations Center gathered around the screens. What they were about to witness would become the stuff of legend, passed down through generations of fighter pilots in hushed tones over whiskey. The aircraft was dying. Everyone could see that. Hydraulic fluid streamed behind it like arterial spray, visible even from satellite imagery. The landing gear hung at an impossible angle, neither fully extended nor retracted, locked in mechanical purgatory. One engine showed fluctuating temperatures that suggested catastrophic damage, yet somehow, impossibly, it kept flying. The pilot hadn't said a word since emerging from that valley. Not a distress call, not a status update. Nothing but the steady pulse of the transponder proving someone was still alive in that cockpit. 3 F-16s had scrambled to provide escort, their pilots struggling to match the crippled Warthog's unpredictable speed and altitude. Phantom 26, this is Viper lead, please acknowledge. Silence. Phantom, if you can hear us, click your mic twice. Nothing but static laced with the sound of tortured metal. In the operations center, Major Alina Kovac stood perfectly still, arms crossed, jaw tight. She'd flown A-10s for 8 years before transitioning to tactical operations. She knew what that silence meant. The pilot was working. Every ounce of concentration focused on keeping that aircraft airborne, hands dancing across controls that probably weren't responding the way they should, feet constantly adjusting rudder pressure to compensate for asymmetric thrust. Speaking would mean diverting mental resources that couldn't be spared. Kovac had done it herself once, over Helmand Province, nursing a bird home with half a tail missing. "Someone tell me who's flying that aircraft," the base commander demanded. A young intelligence officer scrolled through the flight manifest, his finger stopping on a name. His face went pale. "Sir, it's Captain Westfall, Maya Westfall, call sign Mockingbird." The room's energy shifted. Kovac's eyes narrowed. She knew that call sign, knew the story behind it. Some of the younger pilots snickered, the nickname synonymous with someone who supposedly couldn't hack it under real pressure, who'd gotten the call sign during training for allegedly hesitating on a close air support run. But Kovac had read the classified after-action reports. She knew what really happened that day. The briefing Westfall had questioned wasn't cowardice. It was the only reason 12 Marines came home breathing. Someone near the back of the operations center muttered something about women pilots and pressure situations. Kovac turned her head slowly, her silence more cutting than any reprimand. The atmosphere turned glacial. On screen, Phantom 26 continued its painful crawl toward Bagram, dropping another 100 feet. The math was brutal. At current altitude and distance, the aircraft had maybe 10 minutes before physics and gravity made the decision for everyone involved. The tower controller's voice crackled through the speakers, professional but tight with tension. "Phantom 26, Bagram Tower. Runway 21 is clear. All traffic holding. Emergency vehicles standing by. You are cleared for straighten approach." Still nothing from Westfall. Just the labored sound of that dying aircraft, metal screaming against itself, wind howling through ruptures in the fuselage. The F-16 pilots maintained their positions, flying formation with an aircraft that had no business still being airborne. "I've never seen an A-10 take that much damage and stay up," one of them transmitted on the command frequency. "Jesus Christ, she's hand-flying it. The entire hydraulic system must be gone." On the ground, the emergency response team raced into position. Foam trucks, ambulances, fire suppression units. They'd seen plenty of emergency landings, but this was different. Everyone felt it. This wasn't just another close call. This was something that would define careers, change regulations, end up in textbooks. Maya Westfall had been in that valley for a reason. A Navy SEAL team, pinned down by overwhelming fire, their extraction helicopter shot to pieces on the mountainside. When the call came through for close air support, every available asset had declined. Too dangerous, too many surface-to-air threats. The valley was a kill box and command was already writing off the SEAL team as lost, everyone except Westfall. She'd pushed her throttles forward and pointed her nose toward mountains that had already claimed better pilots than her. Now she was coming home. Maybe. The A-10 dropped another 50 feet, its shadow racing across the desert floor. Inside that cockpit, Maya Westfall wasn't thinking about the legends being born in the operations center. She wasn't thinking about the call sign that had followed her like a shadow for 3 years. She was thinking about hydraulic pressure that read 0, about a stick that responded 2 seconds late to her inputs, about landing gear that had jammed halfway between life and death. She was thinking about her daughter, Reese, 6 years old, waiting at her sister's house in Colorado Springs, probably watching cartoons, completely unaware that her mother was currently determining whether physics would allow one more miracle. The throttle sat in her left hand, steady despite the fatigue screaming through her shoulders. 27 minutes of combat flying, dodging surface-to-air missiles by instinct, putting 30mm rounds exactly where they needed to go to keep 8 SEALs alive. 27 minutes of watching her aircraft disintegrate around her while she worked the problem, always working the problem. The radio hung silent on her helmet, but she could hear them. Tower, escort fighters, operations center. All of them waiting for her to speak, to confirm she was still functional, still capable of bringing this bird down without turning it into a fireball visible from Kabul. She clicked her mic once, not in response to their questions, just to let them know she was alive and working. The runway appeared on the horizon, a strip of civilization carved into hostile territory. Too far. The math whispered cruel truths in her ear. Current altitude, current descent rate, current airspeed. The numbers didn't line up. She'd be on the ground before she reached that runway, one way or another. Maya's right hand moved across the panel, fingers finding the backup controls by muscle memory. The backup hydraulic system read critical. She had maybe one shot at getting the landing gear to lock, if she could generate enough pressure through the emergency system. But trying meant possibly losing what little control she still had. Phantom 2-6, we're reading fluctuations in your remaining engine. Advise status. Tower's voice calm but urgent. She clicked twice. Negative. No time to explain that the fluctuations were her intentionally varying throttle pressure to maintain altitude while compensating for the asymmetric weight distribution of jammed landing gear. No time to explain that she was flying a $30 million aircraft like a student pilot's first lesson, feeling every input 3 heartbeats after she made it. The ground rose to meet her, inevitable as gravity. The F-16s broke formation, climbing away to give her room. In the operations center, every person stood frozen, watching destiny unfold in real time. Kavek's hands had balled into fists. She knew exactly what Westfall was going through. The isolation of that cockpit, the weight of every decision, the knowledge that hundreds of people were watching and waiting for you to either become a hero or a cautionary tale. "Come on, Mockingbird," Kavek whispered. "Bring it home." The A-10 crossed the airfield boundary at 200 feet, far too low for a normal approach. Westfall had seconds to make a decision that would define everything. Try to extend the landing gear fully, risk complete hydraulic failure and lose all control. Or belly land the aircraft, gear half-jammed, and hope the structural integrity held when 30,000 pounds of metal hit concrete at 140 knots. Her hand moved to the emergency gear extension. Through the canopy, she could see the runway crew, tiny figures in their trucks, waiting to see if they'd be conducting a rescue or a recovery. She thought about Reese, about the promise she'd made before this deployment. "I'll come home, baby. I always come home." The T-handle pulled with resistance, fighting her every inch. Somewhere in the bowels of the aircraft, mechanical systems that had survived a war zone attempted one last function. The landing gear groaned, metal grinding against metal. On the indicators, the nose gear light flickered between red and green, unable to commit to either truth. Maya didn't look at the lights. She felt the aircraft's response, the subtle shift in drag, the slight yaw to the left that meant something had moved but not necessarily locked. 500 feet to touchdown. Her right hand never left the stick. The runway filled her vision, concrete scarred by 1,000 landings, about to receive one more that would either validate every hour she'd spent learning to fly or prove that some aircraft simply couldn't be saved. The operations center held its collective breath. The escort fighters circled overhead, witnesses to history. The SEAL team, medevac to safety an hour earlier, listened to the radio from a field hospital, aware that the pilot who'd saved their lives might not save her own. Maya Westfall clicked her mic 3 times, a signal understood by every military pilot since the first one climbed into a cockpit. I'm committed. No turning back now. The main gear touched first, a moment of contact that felt like victory before the nose gear collapsed completely, unable to hold under the aircraft's weight and the violence of landing. The A-10's nose dropped hard, titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting the pilot as sparks erupted from the runway contact. The aircraft began to slew sideways, momentum carrying it at angles never intended by the engineers. Maya's feet worked the rudder pedals, her left hand shoving the throttle to idle, right hand fighting the stick to keep the wings level as the world became chaos and noise, and the certain knowledge that she was about to discover whether luck had one more favor to grant. Metal screamed against concrete. The remaining engine coughed, died, removed the last variable from an equation that had become purely about physics and fate. The A-10 rotated 20 degrees off centerline, still moving, still dangerous, trailing a comet's tail of sparks and debris. Emergency vehicles paced alongside, foam cannons ready, crews preparing for the worst. In the cockpit, Maya had entered a state beyond fear, beyond thought, existing purely in action and reaction. She'd done everything right, made every correct decision, flown an unflyable aircraft through impossible circumstances and brought it within reach of survival. What happened next wasn't up to her anymore. The aircraft began to slow, friction and destroyed components stealing velocity. 90 knots, 80, 70, still sliding, still rotating, but losing the energy that made it lethal. The right wing dipped, scraped concrete, sent another shower of sparks into the Afghan afternoon. 50 knots, 40. The world began to slow down, time reasserting its normal pace. Maya could see individual faces in the emergency crews now, see the tension in their body language, see them calculating intercept angles and response times. 30 knots, 20. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Phantom 26, tail number 4731, came to rest 2,000 feet down runway 21 at Bagram Airfield. Silence fell across the base, broken only by the settling sounds of tortured metal and the approaching sirens of emergency response. In the operations center, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They stared at the screen showing a destroyed aircraft resting at an angle, foam already coating it, emergency crews swarming. Then Major Kovac began to clap. Slowly at first, deliberately, each impact of her palms a statement. One by one, the others joined her. The applause built until it filled the operations center, a standing ovation for a pilot they couldn't see, in a cockpit they couldn't reach, for a performance that had redefined what was possible. On the runway, Maya Westfall sat in the silence of a dead aircraft. Her hands remained on the controls for a long moment, muscle memory refusing to accept that the flight was over. Her breathing came in controlled cycles, the same discipline that had kept her alive for the past hour reasserting itself. The canopy was jammed. She could see emergency crews working to manually release it, their movements urgent despite the lack of fire. She clicked her mic one final time. Phantom 26 is down safe. Her voice was steady, professional, betraying nothing of the trembling that had started in her legs, the adrenaline crash that was about to hit her like a freight train. Copy that, Phantom. Welcome home. Tower's response carried emotion that broke protocol, but nobody would write it up. Some moments transcended regulations. The canopy released with a hydraulic hiss. Hands reached in, helping her disconnect oxygen, communications, the straps that had held her to her seat through maneuvers that should have torn the aircraft apart. Maya stood on unsteady legs, accepting help from a crew chief who looked at her with something approaching reverence. The sun hit her face, real and warm. The air smelled of jet fuel and foam and survival. She was home. She'd kept her promise. Around her, the emergency crews worked with practiced efficiency, but she could feel their glances, sense the shift in how they moved around her. She'd been just another pilot an hour ago. Now she was something else, something that would take days to fully understand. As they helped her down from the cockpit, Maya Westfall, call sign Mockingbird, allowed herself one moment of weakness. Her legs buckled slightly, caught by strong hands that had been expecting it. "I got you, Captain," the crew chief said quietly. "We got you," she nodded, not trusting her voice yet. In the distance, she could see officers approaching, questions forming before they'd even arrived. There would be debriefs, medical evaluations, incident reports that would take weeks to complete. But first, there would be a phone call to Colorado Springs. A little girl who needed to hear her mother's voice. Everything else could wait. The SEAL team arrived at the hospital 3 hours later, walking wounded still, having refused anything stronger than local anesthesia because they'd heard Mockingbird was coming in for debrief. Lieutenant Commander Jacob Chen, team leader, had taken shrapnel to both legs. He leaned on a crutch, jaw set against pain that medication barely touched. 7 teammates followed, a mix of bandages, slings, and the kind of exhaustion that came from dancing with death and winning by inches. They found Maya in the medical facility, sitting on an exam table while a doctor checked her vitals. She'd refused sedation just like they had. Some experiences needed to be felt fully, remembered clearly, earned completely. Chen stopped in the doorway. His voice, when he spoke, carried the kind of respect that couldn't be faked or manufactured. "Captain Westfall." Maya looked up, met his eyes. She recognized the look. She'd seen it in mirrors after her own close calls, the expression of someone still processing survival. "Lieutenant Commander, my team wanted to meet the pilot." Chen stepped into the room, his teammates following. "Wanted to say thank you doesn't quite cover it, but it's where we start." Maya slid off the exam table, waving away the doctor's protests. She stood straight despite the fatigue pulling at her bones. "You'd have done the same." "No, ma'am." Chen's response was immediate, flat, honest. "We wouldn't have. Nobody else came when we called. You did." The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that statistics and after-action reports could never capture. The valley where they'd been pinned down had earned its reputation through blood. Aircraft losses, failed rescue attempts, names added to memorial walls. Command had written them off. Standard tactical doctrine said don't throw good money after bad, don't risk more assets trying to save what's already lost. Maya Westfall had heard standard tactical doctrine and made a different choice. One of the younger SEALs, barely 25, stepped forward. His arm was in a sling, but his eyes were clear. "I got a daughter. She's 2. I wasn't gonna see her again until you showed up." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Now I get to watch her grow up, because of you." Maya felt something tight in her chest, the emotional armor she'd maintained through the debrief starting to crack. "I have a daughter too," she said quietly. 6 years old, Reese. I made her a promise." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They understood promises made to children, the weight of coming home, the burden of love that made you fly into valleys where better pilots had died. Chen extended his hand. Maya took it, felt the grip of someone who understood exactly what she traded to keep them alive. Pieces of her aircraft. Maybe pieces of her career, depending on how the investigation went. Definitely pieces of the illusion that she was invincible. "The call sign," Chen said. "Mockingbird. Mind if I ask the story?" Maya's jaw tightened. The call sign had followed her like a shadow, a joke that had turned cruel shorthand for a pilot who supposedly couldn't handle pressure. "Training exercise 3 years ago, close air support scenario. I questioned the coordinates they gave me." She paused, old anger mixing with vindication. "Strike commander insisted they were solid. I delayed the run, demanded verification. Turned out the coordinates were off by 200 meters. Would have smoked a friendly patrol if I'd followed orders." Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Understanding. Respect. They gave you a call sign that meant you hesitated. They gave me a call sign that meant I mimicked concern without having the courage to act. Maya's voice carried 3 years of carrying that weight. Mockingbird, all noise, no substance. That's not what it means now. One of the other SEALs spoke up, a massive man with burn dressings on his arms. Not after today, Chen nodded slowly. Radio chatter's already changing it. Mockingbird, the pilot who sees death coming and calls it out, who flies into hell when everyone else backs away. He glanced at his team. We'd follow you anywhere, Captain, just say the word. Maya felt tears threatening, pushed them back through discipline that had been forged in cockpits and ready rooms. She'd spent 3 years proving herself, fighting against a reputation that wasn't fair or accurate. Today had changed the math, shifted the narrative. But it hadn't changed who she was. I'm just a pilot, she said. Did what anyone would do. Except they didn't. Chen's voice carried finality. We called for help. The entire theater heard us. You were the only one who answered. That's not just a pilot, that's something else. He straightened despite the pain, brought his hand up in a salute that belonged to parade grounds and ceremony, not hospital rooms and exhaustion. His team followed, 7 fists raised to 7 foreheads, honoring a debt that couldn't be repaid. Maya returned the salute, military courtesy overriding the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. When they lowered their hands, Chen spoke once more. You need anything ever, you call. Doesn't matter where we are or what we're doing. You call, we come. That's a promise from JSOC, and we keep our promises. Then they were gone, filing out with the particular walk of warriors who'd seen the other side and come back changed. Maya sat back down on the exam table, suddenly aware of how tired she was. The doctor resumed his examination, making notes about elevated heart rate and blood pressure that would be normal after what she'd been through. Quite a day, Captain, he said, shining a light in her eyes, checking pupil response. Quite a day, she agreed. But it wasn't over. The next morning, Maya faced the Accident Investigation Board. 5 officers seated behind a table, recorders running, every word about to become part of an official record that would follow her for the rest of her career. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vance, board president, reviewed the preliminary findings with an expression that revealed nothing. Captain Westfall, you violated a direct order from command. The valley where the SEAL team was located had been designated a no-fly zone after multiple aircraft losses. You were explicitly instructed to hold position and wait for alternative extraction options. Maya sat at attention, uniform pressed despite having slept maybe 3 hours. Yes, ma'am. I disobeyed that order. Your aircraft sustained damage consistent with multiple surface-to-air missile near misses, concentrated small arms fire, and at least one direct hit from what we believe was a Russian-made ZSU anti-aircraft system. By all accounts, you should have been shot down. Yes, ma'am. Instead, you remained on station for 27 minutes, expended all ordnance, and successfully suppressed enemy fire long enough for the SEAL team to reach defensive positions. Vance's finger traced down the report. You then egressed the valley with catastrophic aircraft damage, maintained controlled flight for 43 minutes, and executed an emergency landing that, while destructive to the aircraft, resulted in no pilot injury and saved a $20 million asset from total loss. The aircraft is a total loss, ma'am. Maya's voice stayed level. The damage assessment team says it's not economically repairable. Nevertheless. Vance set down the report, finally meeting Maya's eyes. You violated orders, risked a valuable aircraft and an experienced pilot, and achieved an outcome that standard tactical doctrine would consider impossible. Maya said nothing. There was nothing to say. She'd made her choices, flown her mission, and now she'd face whatever consequences the board determined appropriate. Vance leaned back in her chair. I spent 6 hours yesterday reading through your personnel file, Captain. Your training records are exemplary. Your performance evaluations are consistently superior. Yet somehow you've been stuck at the same duty station, flying the same missions for 3 years without advancement opportunities. She paused, letting the implication hang. The same 3 years since you received your call sign, Mockingbird. The other board members shifted, uncomfortable with where this was heading. Vance continued. I also pulled the classified after-action report from the training exercise that earned you that call sign. The coordinates you questioned were provided by a strike coordinator who had failed land navigation training twice. The friendly patrol you saved from fratricide was a Marine reconnaissance unit that included the nephew of a sitting congressman. Maya's eyes widened slightly. She'd never seen the classified report, never known the full political fallout of her decision. The strike coordinator was quietly reassigned. The incident was buried, and you were given a call sign that effectively ended your advancement because certain officers found it easier to blame you for creating an uncomfortable situation than to acknowledge their own failures. Vance's voice carried steel now. Does that sound accurate, Captain? I wasn't aware of those details, ma'am. Of course you weren't. That's how these things work. Vance glanced at her fellow board members. I'm not supposed to say this, but I'm going to anyway. You've been blackballed for 3 years because you made the right call and embarrassed the wrong people. She tapped the stack of papers in front of her. But yesterday changed something. You can't blackball a pilot who saves 8 SEALs from a valley that's killed better people than the ones who have been holding you back. The media attention alone makes you untouchable now. Maya processed this information, emotions carefully locked down. Vindication mixed with anger, relief mixed with bitterness for 3 years lost to petty politics and fragile egos. What happens now, ma'am? Vance smiled, and it wasn't kind. It was the expression of someone about to correct an injustice with efficiency and pleasure. Now we make things right. She opened a folder, slid a document across the table. Congratulations, Major Westfall. Your promotion was already approved, just waiting for appropriate timing. Turns out saving 8 SEALs is appropriate timing. Maya stared at the promotion orders, the gold oak leaf that came with them. 3 years of being stuck in place, erased by a single mission that had almost killed her. There's more. Vance slid another document forward. You're being reassigned to Nelly's Air Force Base, Weapons School. They want you on the instructor cadre, the Weapons School, where the best pilots taught the next generation, where tactical doctrine was written and rewritten, where legends were made. Maya had applied twice, been rejected both times, told she lacked the necessary experience and temperament. And the call sign, ma'am. That's up to you, Major. You can request a change as part of your reassignment. Start fresh at Nelly's with a clean slate. Vance's eyes held something approaching respect. Or you can keep it and make damn sure everyone knows what Mockingbird really means. Maya didn't hesitate. I'll keep it, ma'am. I earned it both times. Vance nodded slowly as if she'd expected that answer. Dismissed, Major. You've got 72 hours before you're due at Nelly's. I suggest you spend at least some of it with your daughter. Maya stood, saluted, and walked out of the room with her head high. Behind her, she heard one of the board members speak quietly to Vance. You think she's ready for weapons school, after what she just went through? Vance's response carried through the closing door. I think she's exactly what weapons school needs. Someone who knows the difference between following orders and doing what's right. 3 days later, Maya stood on her sister's porch in Colorado Springs, watching Reese play in the backyard. Her daughter was building something elaborate with sticks and rocks, narrating a story about princesses and dragons that seemed to involve complex engineering principles. She's been talking about you nonstop since you called. Jessica, Maya's sister, handed her a beer, told everyone at school her mom flies the plane from that video. The video. Someone had recorded the landing from their phone, posted it online. 5 million views in 48 hours. The comments ranged from awe to disbelief, with a healthy dose of conspiracy theorists insisting it was CGI because no pilot could fly that damaged. Maya took a long drink, letting the cold beer wash away some of the tension. I didn't want her seeing that. She's 6. She doesn't understand what she's watching. Jessica settled into the porch chair next to her. She just knows her mom is famous now and all her friends think it's cool. Famous. Maya hadn't considered that angle. She'd been too focused on survival, then debriefs, then the sudden career resurrection that came with political attention and social media virality. She just wanted to do her job and come home to her daughter. Now she was a talking point on news channels, a case study in military training forums, a symbol of something larger than herself. How are you really doing? Jessica's voice softened, the question carrying the weight of someone who'd known Maya long enough to see past the tactical professionalism. Maya watched Reese, memorizing the way afternoon sunlight caught in her daughter's hair, the sound of her laughter, the absolute certainty in her movements as she built her imaginary kingdom. "I'm good," she said quietly. "I'm here, that's what matters. The nightmares. Haven't slept long enough to have them yet." Maya smiled without humor. "Give it time, they'll come." They sat in silence, sisters who'd learned early that some experiences couldn't be explained, only endured. Their father had been Air Force, had done 3 tours in Desert Storm, had come home changed in ways that teenage daughters couldn't quite understand. Now Maya carried that same weight, the knowledge of how thin the line was between living and dying, how quickly everything could change. "The promotion's good though," Jessica offered. "About damn time." "Yeah," Maya's jaw tightened. "Shouldn't have taken nearly dying to get it, but I'll take it." Reese looked up from her construction project, saw her mother watching, and ran across the yard with the kind of unself-conscious joy that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. "Mom, Mom, come see what I built. It's a fortress." Maya set down her beer, opened her arms as her daughter crashed into her with the full force of 6-year-old enthusiasm. She breathed in the smell of sunshine and grass and the strawberry shampoo Jessica used, grounding herself in the reality of this moment. This was why she'd flown into that valley, why she'd stayed when every instinct screamed to run, why she'd nursed a dying aircraft home instead of ejecting over hostile territory. For this. For the ability to hold her daughter and know tomorrow was still possible. "Show me your fortress, baby." She let Reese pull her into the yard, listening to an elaborate explanation of defensive positions and dragon weaknesses, the kind of tactical briefing only a 6-year-old could deliver with complete sincerity. Behind them, Jessica watched with a mixture of relief and fear. Her sister had always been brave, even as a kid, the one who climbed highest, jumped farthest, pushed every boundary. That bravery had nearly gotten her killed 3 days ago. Would probably put her in danger again because that's what pilots did, what warriors did. They ran toward trouble when everyone else ran away. The week in Colorado passed too quickly, the way precious time always did. Maya spent every moment she could with Reese, building memories to carry into whatever came next. They went to the zoo, the science museum, the park where Maya had learned to ride a bike 3 decades earlier. Normal things, simple things. Things that mattered more than medals or promotions or viral videos. On the last day, Maya knelt down to eye level with her daughter. Reese's face was serious, sensing that something important was happening. "I have to go back to work, baby. Back to the plains." Reese's voice was small, worried in a way that broke Maya's heart. "Yeah, back to the plains, but different planes at a different base. I'm going to be teaching other pilots now." "Teaching them to be brave like you?" Maya pulled her daughter close, feeling the weight of that question. "Teaching them to be smart, to make good choices, to come home. You always come home." Reese's voice was muffled against Maya's shoulder. "You promised." "I promised, and I'll keep promising." Maya pulled back, looked into eyes that were the same shade of hazel as her own. "Your mom's going to be fine, better than fine. I'm going to be great at this new job." Reese nodded, trying to be brave, trying to match the strength she saw in her mother. "Can I visit?" "Absolutely. Nellie's has a family day. We'll arrange it so you can see where I work, maybe even sit in a cockpit." That earned a genuine smile, the first in days. "Really? Really?" Maya stood, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Now go give Aunt Jessica a hug. I need to hit the road if I'm going to make it to Vegas before dark." The drive from Colorado Springs to Las Vegas took 11 hours, Interstate 70 cutting through mountains and desert. Maya made the journey in silence, no radio, no podcasts, just the steady hum of the engine and the ribbon of highway stretching toward a future that looked different than it had a week ago. Somewhere in eastern Utah, she pulled over at a rest stop, stared out at red rocks catching the sunset. Her phone buzzed with messages. Congratulations from fellow pilots. Interview requests from journalists. A text from Lieutenant Commander Chen checking in, making sure she was okay. She ignored most of them, focused on the one that mattered, a photo from Jessica, Reese asleep on the couch, clutching a model A-10 that Maya had bought her at the base exchange. The caption read, "Already dreaming of following in your footsteps. God help us all." Maya smiled, saved the photo, and got back on the road. Nellie's Air Force Base sprawled across the Nevada desert, 11,000 acres of runways and hangars, and the collected expertise of the Air Force's best pilots. Maya drove through the gate at 2200 hours, exhausted but running on the particular energy that came with new beginnings. Her quarters were in the officers' housing, a small apartment that had clearly been cleaned recently but still carried the slightly dusty smell of vacancy. She unpacked methodically, hanging uniforms, arranging the few personal items she'd brought. A photo of Reese went on the nightstand. Her wings, the ones she'd earned a decade ago, went next to it. Everything else could wait until tomorrow. Sleep came hard despite the exhaustion, her mind replaying those 27 minutes in the valley, every decision, every near miss. The moment she'd realized the SEALs were out of time and options. The acceptance that she might not make it out, followed by the fierce determination that she would, because Reese deserved a mother who kept her promises. At 0530, her alarm pulled her from dreams of hydraulic failures and locked landing gear. She dressed in fresh flight suit, double-checked that her new rank insignia was properly placed, and headed to the weapons school building. The campus was already buzzing with activity. Early morning flights taxiing out, maintenance crews performing pre-flight checks, instructors reviewing lesson plans. Maya found her way to the main briefing room where new instructor cadre were scheduled to meet. 6 other pilots filled the chairs, all experienced, all with their own stories of how they'd earned their way here. The conversation stopped when she entered. Everyone knew who she was. The video, the news coverage, the pilot who'd become famous by accident. Major Jackson, a weapons school graduate who'd done 2 tours training Allied forces, spoke first. "Well, if it isn't Mockingbird herself. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel if they're letting hotshots who can't follow orders teach here." The room went quiet. Maya had known this was coming. The weapons school had a culture, a hierarchy, a way of testing new instructors to see if they'd fold under pressure. She met Jackson's eyes calmly. "I can follow orders just fine, Major. I just prefer the ones that don't involve leaving Americans to die in valleys while we debate tactical doctrine." Jackson's expression flickered. He'd expected her to be defensive, apologetic, easy to rattle. Instead, she'd gone straight to the heart of it, the thing none of them could argue against. 8 SEALs came home. That was the only statistic that mattered. Heard your aircraft was a total loss. $20 million of taxpayer equipment turned into scrap. Jackson wasn't giving up easily. "I think saving 8 Tier 1 operators offsets the cost-benefit analysis." Maya's voice stayed level, professional. "But I'm sure there's a spreadsheet somewhere that would tell us the exact dollar value of their lives. Maybe you could run those numbers for me." Another instructor, Captain Williams, coughed to cover a laugh. Jackson's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the door opened and Colonel David Pierce entered. Pierce commanded the weapons school, had more combat hours than everyone in the room combined, and carried the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. "Major Westfall, welcome to the weapons school." Pierce's handshake was firm, his eyes assessing. "I assume you've met some of your fellow instructors." "Yes, sir." Major Jackson was just educating me on cost-benefit analysis. Maya's tone carried the faintest edge of humor. Pierce glanced at Jackson, something unreadable in his expression. "I'm sure he was. Jackson, tell me, what's your single sortie record for danger-close support?" Jackson hesitated. 11 minutes, sir, supporting a marine company in Fallujah. 11 minutes, impressive." Pierce turned to Maya. "And yours, Major?" 27 minutes, sir, last week." Maya didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew exactly which 27 minutes she meant. Pierce nodded slowly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're all going to work together to train the next generation of tactical pilots. You're going to put aside whatever dick-measuring contests you think are important and focus on making sure the kids we send downrange come home alive." His voice hardened. Major Jackson, if I hear that you're creating a hostile environment for any instructor based on their fame, gender, or willingness to save American lives, I will personally ensure your next assignment involves PowerPoint presentations in the basement of the Pentagon. Are we clear? Crystal, sir. Jackson's face had gone red, but he nodded. Good. Major Westfall, you're assigned to the close air support training track. Your first class starts Monday. I suggest you spend the weekend familiarizing yourself with our curriculum and making any adjustments you think appropriate based on, your recent experiences. Pierce's dry humor cut some of the tension. Dismissed. As the instructors filed out, Williams fell into step beside Maya. That was well played. Jackson's been here 2 years, thinks he owns the place. Good to see someone put him in check. Wasn't trying to start a war, Maya said quietly. Just trying to do my job. Your job just became a lot more complicated. Williams glanced back toward the briefing room. Every student who comes through here knows your story. You're going to have kids who think you're either a hero or a reckless cowboy. Your challenge is teaching them the difference. Maya nodded. She'd been thinking about that since accepting the assignment. How to distill 27 minutes of chaos into lessons that could save lives without encouraging recklessness. How to teach judgment that couldn't really be taught, only learned through experience. That weekend, she buried herself in curriculum reviews and lesson plans. The weapons school's close air support doctrine was solid, built on decades of experience and continuous evolution. But there were gaps. Scenarios that didn't quite capture the reality she'd lived through. Assumptions that broke down when aircraft systems failed and enemy fire was concentrated. By Sunday evening, she drafted a proposal for a new training module. Worst-case CAS operations. The scenarios nobody wanted to think about but everyone needed to prepare for. Monday morning arrived with the clarity that came from purpose. Maya stood in front of her first class, 12 pilots from across the Air Force, selected for weapons school based on performance and potential. They stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She didn't start with introductions or credentials. She started with a question. How many of you have seen the video of my emergency landing? All 12 hands went up. Expected. How many of you think you could have done the same thing? 8 hands stayed up. Also expected. Young pilots, confident, sure of their abilities. 4 were smart enough to recognize what they didn't know. Here's the truth. Maya's voice cut through the morning air conditioning. What you saw in that video was 27 minutes of mistakes, failures, and desperate improvisation. I didn't do anything heroic. I just refused to quit when quitting was the logical choice. She pulled up a slide showing her aircraft's damage assessment. The photos were brutal. Holes punched through wings and fuselage. Hydraulic lines shredded, control surfaces bent and twisted, landing gear mechanisms destroyed. This is what happens when you fly into a valley that's been declared a no-fly zone. This is the price of tactical decisions made with incomplete information and excessive confidence. She advanced to the next slide. Radio transcripts from the mission. The SEAL team's desperate calls for support. Command's explicit orders to hold position. Her decision to disobey. I broke the chain of command. Violated direct orders. Put myself and my aircraft at risk. And in doing so, I saved 8 lives. Maya paused, meeting each student's eyes in turn. Your job, by the time you leave this school, is to understand when those kinds of decisions are justified and when they're just ego wearing a hero's costume. The 12 pilots shifted, the easy confidence fading into something more thoughtful. This wasn't the lecture they'd expected. This wasn't a glory story or a template for success. This was something messier, more honest, more useful. What happened in that valley wasn't exceptional flying. It was adequate flying in exceptional circumstances. The difference matters. Maya pulled up a tactical map, marked with enemy positions, friendly forces, terrain features. We're going to reconstruct the mission minute by minute. You're going to see every mistake I made, every time I got lucky, every moment where I should have died but didn't. She pointed to the entry vector. And then you're going to fly the same mission in the simulator, with the same aircraft damage, the same enemy fire, the same time pressure, and we're going to see how many of you make it out. The challenge hung in the air. One student, Lieutenant Ramirez, raised her hand. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Granted. Why are you showing us your mistakes? Most instructors lead with their successes. Maya smiled, and it wasn't warm. Because success in this job isn't about being perfect. It's about being adequate when adequate is all that's left. Your mistakes will teach you more than my successes ever could. She advanced to the next slide, a photo of the SEAL team in the hospital. Chen and his 7 operators, injured but alive. These men are alive because I made the right mistakes at the right time, because I understood the difference between following procedures and accomplishing the mission, because I was willing to sacrifice my aircraft, my career, and if necessary, my life to get the job done. Maya's voice softened slightly. That's what we're here to teach. Not how to be heroes, how to make the impossible barely possible, how to drag yourself and your aircraft through hell and come out the other side with something worth saving. The room was absolutely silent. Outside, jets roared on takeoff, the constant background noise of a fighter base. Inside, 12 pilots confronted the reality that the weapons school wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about preparing for the day when adequate was all you had and it had to be enough. Questions? Maya asked. A dozen hands went up. She smiled, genuine this time. These were her students now, her responsibility, her chance to make sure the next pilot who faced an impossible situation had the training to turn impossible into unlikely. 3 months into her tenure at weapons school, Maya had developed a reputation. Hard but fair, demanding but honest. Students either loved her or transferred out within the first 2 weeks. There was no middle ground when the instruction involved confronting your own limitations. Lieutenant Ramirez had become one of her strongest students, a pilot who understood that confidence without competence was just another word for dangerous. Today's exercise was advanced close air support, multiple friendly units engaged with enemy forces in complex terrain. Ramirez, talk me through your targeting priorities. Maya watched the simulator feed, saw the student working the problem, hands moving across controls with practiced efficiency. Priority 1 is the heavy machine gun position on Ridge Line Alpha. It's suppressing the element trying to reach extraction. Take that out, they can move. Ramirez's voice was calm, focused. Good, time to target. 30 seconds at current approach angle, but I'm reading possible SAM radar from Sector 3. So what's your play? Maya already knew the answer, was testing to see if her student would commit or hesitate. I'm taking the shot. SAM hasn't locked yet and the ground element is out of time. Sometimes you have to roll the dice before you know if they're loaded. Ramirez put her simulated A-10 into the attack run, fingers adjusting for wind and altitude, mind calculating impact points and collateral damage radius. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened up, 30mm rounds chewing through the machine gun position with precision that would make most pilots jealous. Target destroyed. Friendlies moving. And then the SAM radar locked, warning tones filling the cockpit 2 seconds from launch. Ramirez broke hard right, dispensed chaff, dove for terrain masking. The missile simulation tracked, lost lock, reacquired. She jinked left, used a ridgeline for cover, came out low and fast. The SAM missed by 20 meters, close enough to rattle teeth if it had been real. Status. Maya's voice was clinical, pushing past the adrenaline. Target destroyed, no friendly casualties, aircraft damage minimal. But I'm Winchester on countermeasures and that SAM site is still active. Ramirez was breathing hard, the simulator stress response kicking in. So you've got friendlies who need extraction, an active SAM threat, and no defense against another launch. Options. Egress and call for SCAD support. Ramirez worked through the decision tree they drilled endlessly. Come back when the site's suppressed. Friendlies don't have time. Another unit is pinned down 3 clicks east. You're the only close air support available. Maya watched her student process this, saw the moment when training met reality. I stay, fly low, use terrain masking, hit the second target and hope the SAM doesn't get a clean shot. And if it does, then I eject and become another rescue mission. Ramirez's voice carried acceptance. But the ground element makes it out. Maya ended the simulation, the screens going dark. Ramirez sagged in the simulator seat, the physical and mental toll visible. Let's talk about what you just did right. Maya pulled up the mission replay. First, you identified the correct target priority. Second, you committed to the shot when commitment was necessary. Third, You survived the SAM engagement through good flying and better luck. She paused the replay at the moment after the near miss. Now let's talk about what you did wrong. You assumed the SAM site was the only threat. Didn't check for supporting anti-aircraft artillery. Didn't establish a secondary escape route. Put all your faith in terrain masking without confirming the terrain actually masked the radar frequencies involved. Ramirez nodded, absorbing the critique. This was the weapons school method. Success followed by dissection, showing that even when you won, you probably should have lost. In the real world, you'd be dead. Maya's voice was blunt. You got lucky that the SAM operator didn't predict your brake direction. You got lucky that there wasn't a second launcher in Sector 5. Luck isn't a tactic, it's what fills the gap between adequate planning and survival. Yes, ma'am. Ramirez met her instructor's eyes. How do I get better? You just did. You recognized the gap. Most pilots never get that far. Maya shut down the simulator. Tomorrow we run it again. Same scenario, different variables. We'll keep running it until luck isn't part of your survival equation. After the students cleared out, Maya sat alone in the simulator control room. 3 months of teaching had given her perspective on her own mission, on the decisions that had nearly killed her. She'd been lucky too. Lucky that the SAM missiles in that valley had been older models. Lucky that her aircraft's redundant systems had been just redundant enough. Lucky that 30 years of A-10 design philosophy prioritized survivability over performance. But she'd also been good. Good enough to recognize when luck was running out. Good enough to stretch adequate into survivable. Good enough to bring herself and her aircraft home when the smart money said both were lost. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chen. In town for training. Buying you a drink if you're free. She smiled, replied affirmatively. Some connections were worth maintaining, built on shared experience that no one else could really understand. They met at a bar off base, the kind of place where military personnel could blend in with civilians and pretend for a few hours that they were just regular people having regular conversations about regular things. Chen looked good. The limp was barely noticeable now, the physical therapy having done its job. His eyes carried the same weight they'd had in that hospital room, but time had dulled the sharp edges of fresh trauma. Major Westfall, heard you're terrorizing the next generation. Chen slid a beer across the table, making them earn it. Good, they should earn it. He took a long drink. My team's in town for advanced tactical training. Thought we'd swing by, see if you wanted to guest lecture on close air support from the customer perspective. Maya considered that. Her curriculum focused on the pilot's decision-making process, but hearing from the people on the ground could add valuable context. When? Thursday, if you're available, just an hour. Share what it's like being on the receiving end of air support, good and bad. Chen's expression turned serious. Some of these pilots need to understand that we're not just grid coordinates and radio calls. We're people with families and futures, trusting them to make the right call. I'll make it work. Maya raised her glass. To making the right call. To pilots brave enough to answer when everyone else stays silent. They drank to that, to survival, to the strange bond formed when one person's competence became another person's continued existence. Thursday arrived with the particular tension that came before guest lectures. Students knew something different was coming, could sense the deviation from routine. Chen and 2 of his teammates arrived precisely on time, wearing their combat uniforms, the seal trident visible above their left breast pockets. Maya made the introductions brief, let the operators speak for themselves. Chen stood in front of the class, comfortable with being the center of attention, used to briefing rooms and operational planning. Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Commander Jacob Chen. 3 months ago, I was pinned down in a valley in Afghanistan with 7 teammates. We'd been compromised. Our extraction bird was shot to pieces, and every avenue of escape was covered by entrenched enemy forces. He pulled up a photo on the briefing room screen. 8 men, dirty and bleeding, crouched behind rocks that barely qualified as cover. This was taken 12 minutes before Major Westfall arrived. We'd been in contact for 4 hours. Air support had been requested multiple times. Every